So when you ask me a question, I'm going to restate the question in my words and then answer it. That way, when we make the video, you can hear the question I'm responding to. But today is sort of like a breather and clarification day. I want to make sure, I am going to give you new information and everything, but I want to make sure that we have a chance to talk, answer questions, and really, make sure that people are kind of getting clarification and getting what they need to move forward. Let me respond to that real quick, okay? So, because this is an issue for everybody, especially most of my students are working adults. I don't tailor my lessons to kids, though I do still work with some youth students, but for the most part, my students are busy. Even kids these days are ridiculously busy. My childhood was not like that. But answering your question about struggling to make time for guitar, I'm going to just answer this a few different ways. Because first off, again, going back to the discussion last week, guitar is obviously important to everybody who's bothering to take time to buy a guitar, study it, and try to get somewhere with it. And we know that consistency over a long period of time is basically the only way to make lasting progress on the instrument, right? So if you practice, 30 minutes one day a week or every other week or whatever, your hope of getting anywhere with the guitar is basically nil. It's just a terrible way to try to make progress. And that's being blunt about it, because if you lead people on and make them think that, like, oh, any effort is good effort and you're going to get there eventually, that's supportive, but it's not necessarily that helpful, right? Because it's just like weight loss or exercise. If you watch what you eat one day every 3 weeks, you're not going to hit your goal, right? It has to be an everyday thing. It has to be new habits we're building. And a habit is a word that people throw around, but they don't realize that it's actually meant literally, okay? What is a habit? A habit is a genuine compulsion. If you don't act on your habit, you will feel mental distress over that. A habit is something that is part of who you are. Your brain has a compulsion to do that thing because it has become a habit. I have a compulsion to practice. If I go on a trip and I don't have a guitar with me, after about 3 days, I have to buy a guitar. Because if I don't, I get tremendously upset. Okay? And for you to succeed as a musician, by musician I mean someone who plays music and can do the thing. I don't mean a professional, but this applies to professionals as well. But have to develop a genuine practice habit. And that's not a concept. That's not some murky thing. That's a genuine compulsion, a practice habit, right? So there are books on this. You can find books on healthy habit forming and so on. And, there's been traditional folk wisdom and stuff. A lot of people have heard it said that it takes 21 days of something to form a habit. This is like folk wisdom that people have passed around for years. Scientists have done research on this, and they found that a habit actually doesn't take a specific number of days, but it takes a varied amount of days depending on the complexity of the task and how much you have mental pushback on that. A guitar practice habit might take a streak of 70 to 100 days straight to really develop. So if your goal is to practice and you want to become a guitar player, well, you need to get that practice habit developed, and you should set a goal for yourself to build a practice habit. Now, that means trying to practice every single day for at least 100 days straight. Okay? That's not 4 days a week. That's not here and there. It's every single day for 100 days straight. That's not sugarcoating it. That's ripping the Band-Aid off and saying, this is what you're trying to do. And if you're doing anything else, it's not going to be as effective. So how do you make 100 days straight of practice actually happen? Guitar and music in general, you can find studies. It's good for your brain. It's good for your soul, if that's a thing that you believe in. It helps us develop into better people. It is a self-improvement and quality of life enhancement, okay? It is meditative. It is contemplative. It is challenging. It is great to study things and improve our brains. It's healthy. This is a health thing. There are lots of health things. Guitar's not the only one. But it is something that is probably more good for you than it is bad for you to do. Especially as we age and stuff, we want to do things that keep our brain engaged. And so what I like to say to students is, make an hour a day for self-care and have a guitar in your hands for half of that. And if you can't make an hour a day for self-care, guitar is not the problem. Okay? So if you cannot make an hour a day for yourself, for self-care and doing something, self-improvement, working on yourself, breathing, taking time, pursuing what matters to you, guitar is not the issue. Okay? But try to find a time where it's genuine me time and you can sit and breathe and think, meditate, have a guitar in your hands. For me, the only thing that ever worked was waking up earlier than I'm used to and getting it done before other distractions get in the way. Because, again, we can say in our heads, oh, well, I'm going to practice after work. But then something comes up, and guitar, when it's not your job, is always going to get pushed to the side if you haven't made that time for it earlier. The other thing is, give yourself permission to do whatever level of practice you can squeeze in, okay? If that means 5 minutes, that's okay. It's not optimal, but it's okay. And it still works towards helping you build that practice habit. So like on the online portal that my students use with me, we have a practice tracker that tracks streaks of days. And so students have the ability to, it's just like Duolingo or other apps like that where, you get a streak of days going, and then eventually you develop a compulsion to do that thing. And as weird as it is, that kind of brain hacking is sort of what we're setting out to do. So that's my answer there, is just realize that, draw a line in the sand. You're either doing this or you're not, right? And if you're doing it, what you're really doing is making time for yourself. And if you can't make time for yourself, figure your life out in a way that you can, because it's going to be real hard for you to enjoy life if you can't, take an hour a day to breathe. Yeah, well, it's not a problem to want to learn songs, for one. That's very normal, okay? And you'll notice that I haven't even talked about learning songs yet, right? That's also not an oversight on my part. Okay, I've been teaching for 15 years. I'm very well aware of the fact that students come in wanting to learn songs. In fact, the day I bought my first electric guitar, I also bought a Jimi Hendrix songbook and failed to get through that for years, and it wasn't that helpful. So here's the answer. So first off, in this program, we are going to get into songs. So there is that. It's actually scheduled to start more in the next couple weeks. But the fundamentals are everything. You will not be able to play any song well until you have gotten the muscle memory for these chords and learned how to apply them, because songs are not meant for learning guitar. Songs are meant for after you already know how to play guitar, okay? They're meant to be, and at this stages in the process, learning songs is very essential for putting this stuff into context and learning how songs work and getting more experience and so on. Like I said, we are not opposed to learning songs, but the mature view of this is that getting established in the fundamentals first and having a bit of patience, and the amount of patience I'm asking here. Okay, so like you should play guitar for the rest of your life. I'm asking you to be patient for about 8 weeks. Because those fundamentals are actually what will allow you to play songs well. Anything you try to play until you have your fundamentals will sound extremely compromised. Because here's what happens for people. They go in, they look at a song, they're trying to learn chords, they go playing along, okay, I play C, the next chord I need to play is F, and then they'll stop, and they'll go, okay, now I'm going to play F, and they'll strum along, the next chord is G, they'll stop, okay, now I need to play a G chord, and they'll be completely out of time. Songs don't stop in between the chord changes. We don't stop and wait. We need smooth changes. Well, smooth changes can only happen if you have the muscle memory for the chords. And that muscle memory comes through about a half hour total of chord push-ups per chord. So at this point, like I said last week, I've given you 4 chord shapes that you can use to play literally hundreds of thousands, if not millions of songs. Okay? And all I want you to focus on in the training that you're doing is getting the muscle memory for these chords, doing those chord push-up exercises. It takes about 1,000 chord push-ups per chord. Okay? And you can easily track this if you use a metronome. A metronome will tell you how many beats per minute. So if you're doing 1 chord push-up per beat, you can calculate how many you're doing in a minute and how many minutes it's going to take you. And once you have the muscle memory, you'll have them, and you'll be able to fly through the chords, and you will be excellent at it, and you'll be able to play lots and lots of songs, and it will feel really, really good to do that. The chords will sound good. But basically, it is, in my opinion, much better for a student to try to be patient and focus on the fundamentals, like the chord progressions from last week, okay? Thousands of songs are built on those chord progressions, literally thousands of them. So if you're playing those progressions, you are playing songs. You're just not playing specific songs yet, right? And then when you go to play specific songs, they'll probably be made from those progressions. So this is, and then the other part is, separate the idea of practicing structured materials from playing. And what I like to say is make at least a half hour a day of time to practice, but spend as much time as you want playing in addition to that, right? So if you get 20 minutes or 30 minutes of structured practice focusing on, building your muscle memory for your chords, then yeah, feel free to go try learn as many songs as you want to, or do whatever you want there. And we'll talk about learning songs more in a couple weeks, like I said. So, but the work we're doing does directly lead to songs, and then songs themselves are an incredibly inefficient way to learn the guitar. It's actually a terrible misconception, and it holds a lot of people back, like tremendous. Like, because what you're saying, your intuition of, oh, I just want to go in and play songs, that's what I want to do, that's like, all I want to do is eat cake or something like that, right? You have to, have a well-rounded diet, or things are going to get really, really messed up in the long term. And because songs incentivize people to play very poorly, because you're trying to push ahead too fast and get to that end of, I need the song to sound good, or I want to be able to play the song through, and that can ultimately lead to more frustration. So successful practice should look and sound and feel successful. It should feel like you're pushing yourself a little bit, but you're always 100% of the time doing it correctly. And if you're going in and learning a song right now, you're not going to do it correctly, right? It's going to have all kinds of problems, and those problems lead to biases in your playing that lead to long-term bigger issues. So this is why I structure things this way, where and I will always, this is a guarantee to any student I have, I will always be able to explain exactly why we're working on what we're working on and what the next steps are going to be, and so on. So what I'm going to say is, if you can be patient and get through these 8 weeks, you should have what you need to know in order to learn songs. Okay? And also, I'm all about songs. In fact, I have a master's degree in songwriting, and me and my students, we play tons of songs. But we don't primarily train with songs, because songs are not optimized to make you a better player. Songs are optimized to be played and sound nice and be played by people who already know how to play. So there's that sort of, that's the end goal, right? But, going back to like a fitness thing, if I go into a gym and I'm like, well, all I want to do is bench pressing or something, and I'm just going to I want to lift 300 pounds, so I'm going to start trying to do that as early as possible, and it's probably going to lead to injury, being very, very kind of out of balance with the rest of my body, whereas if I were to start working on the fundamentals of my health and start training and making sure that I was ready and learning posture and those types of things, I'm going to be better off in the long term and probably actually do something that's sustainable. The other thing is that you want to get away from depending on a dopamine hit to actually move forward with music. Music is an old world skill. In fact, most of what we do could be thought of as incredibly boring by someone who wanted to think of it that way. A lot of guitar training is things like playing the same scale over and over and over and over again. Right. These old world skills that take, thousands of hours of practice to get to the optimal point, they're not exciting a lot of the time, okay? So it might be exciting to learn a new song, it might be fun to learn a new song, and it's certainly fun to play songs with people, and there are certainly aspects of this that are absolutely enjoyable and life-changing and amazing. Guitar and music in general will lead to new friendships and new scenarios, interesting things happening. The joys are endless, but practice shouldn't need to be entertaining. It's something you do. Okay, when I go to the gym, I'm not worried about having fun. I'm worried about, am I going to do the workout or not? So all of that might be a little bit bleak sounding, but this is coming from a place of, if you can accept the reality. It's kind of going back to what I was saying about practicing, right? Like, just practice every day and don't worry about whether or not it's fun. Don't worry about that. Just, try to enjoy the process, but it's not always going to be the same amount of exciting as playing a video game or reading your favorite book or watching a movie or something like that. Those things are always going to be more interesting and fun and entertaining than sitting there slogging your way through a new chord. And in fact, it takes a lot of calories to learn a new skill, and in the wild, that might lead to starvation and death, okay? So because of that, anytime you work on something, anytime you face a new challenge, there will always be internal voice that says, can't we do something different than this? Isn't it a little bit challenging? And I call it the oh no moment. Like, anytime I have to learn something new, my brain's like, oh no. And I recognize that, and I shove that feeling deep down inside, and I ignore it because I'm like, this is the work. I just got to do it. I get through. And you probably have guitar instructors that will swear up and down that they have a fun method that's going to entertain you the whole time and keep you happy and make you smile. I don't think most of those methods actually lead to people having success. Okay. What I think leads to success is people accepting the reality of what playing an instrument is. And the reality is, this is an old world skill that takes work, and the reason why people fail is because they expect it to be entertaining. They expect it to be fun. The fun part happens later. The first year that you play is the least amount of fun that you'll ever have playing the guitar. Your goal is to just put in the practice. After about 100 hours of practice, you'll be a guitar player, guaranteed. You'll be someone who can play the guitar, who can learn new songs, who can enjoy it, who can have fun with it. And along the way, try to have fun. The goal is not to make it frustrating or awful, but at the same time, don't expect it to be super entertaining the whole time. And if you accept that aspects of it are pretty dry and repetitive, the search for novelty is a huge motivation for humans. And the songs we love mean so much to us. I'm here to tell you, you will be able to play the songs that you want. You'll do best at it if you focus on the fundamentals first, and then you focus on the songs. And again, if you want to focus on learning songs now because you feel like you're ready for that, that's okay, but practice 20 to 30 minutes of fundamentals first, and then do as much songs as you want to after that. And don't expect to succeed when you're doing the songs. Don't expect to succeed, just until you've gotten a couple hundred hours of practice, you're going to be getting closer to being able to play the songs smoothly, but it's not going to be beautiful the way that an experienced performer would play them, right? You can't get there until you've gotten several hundred hours of practice under your belt. I have probably 15 to 20,000 hours of guitar practice behind me, right? I can play songs well, I can pick up new songs and learn them quickly, but this is my full-time job. I have studied under some of the greatest guitarists in the world for years and years and years. I've spent thousands and thousands and thousands of hours practicing things that were like watching paint dry. So for me to sit here and try to say that it's super fun and entertaining all the time, think that it's ultimately bad for the students to try to think that way. But, again, people feel free to disagree with me. I, just trying my best to help. Anyway, we are going to be working on some song stuff. But what I'm saying is the chord progressions we went over last week are songs. They're just songs that we didn't give a specific name to. Right. So does that help at all? Was that yeah, that's the pep talk on practice, and even next week we'll get into better structured practice routines and stuff as well. It's just there's a lot of information in the beginning that we must go through. So now let's get into the lecture portion of this. Like I said, today I just wanted to make sure that we took some time and went over that stuff and had a chance to do a pulse check and see where people are at. And these are extremely both questions, by the way, these are very ordinary things to be struggling with. They're a normal part of the process. Regular practice doesn't come easy for anybody, and everybody wants to get that end reward before they put in the work with the fundamentals. That's just the way we're wired. So like I said, when I got my first guitar, first thing I did was buy a Jimi Hendrix book. So first off, anybody who's trying to be a professional needs to practice 3 to 6 hours a day, every single day. So for me, when students who are beginners are struggling to get a half hour in, it's the triviality, right? It's not, they're not even taking it seriously remotely, right? If you're taking it seriously, you might put in 90 minutes to 3 hours a day. But that's not healthy for beginners, so don't aim for that. What you should aim for is 5 to 30 minutes a day for right now. But if you're trying to get to a point where you play, you're a gigging musician or you play with a band or whatever, try to put in a couple hours a day, right? It's from there, I do about 3 hours of fundamental training and then 3 hours of repertoire practice. Repertoire, the formal term for working on songs. And it's tremendously complicated at the level that I'm working at. And, I'm trying to be among the best players in the world. So for me, I have a bit of work to do. Your average song player, your average guitarist, they're not even remotely close. Because when you get to that next level, it's like the 80-20 rule, where that last 20% takes 80% more effort, right? And most popular guitarists and most music we hear is not pushing the boundaries of the human limits. But when you hear a solo, like a world-class soloist play, they're able to play faster than the human ear can even discern the notes, and they're able to do so completely effortlessly. So I could be soloing and having a conversation with my mom or making a sandwich or whatever. It's just not even a big deal. And so to get to that point, that's the 80% more effort side of things. And most people are just never going to want to even remotely put in the work to do any of it. But it's a lot of effort. It's more effort than anyone can comprehend. And because of that, that's why they are obsessed with imagining that world-class players have talent. Because they cannot accept the amount of work that person has done. When people see me perform guitar at a top level, they think, "You're so gifted at this. I could never do that." Well, have you bothered to put in 15,000 hours of effort? If you have, maybe you could do it. I certainly did. And Before I put in that 15,000 hours, I couldn't do it. So do I have a talent? I don't know. Maybe the only talent I have is that I'd put in the effort. This was really important to me, and it's been a lifelong pursuit. And the guitarists that people look up to, the players, they've put in the effort as well. Do they have talent? I don't know, but guaranteed they have 12 to 20,000 hours of practice under their belt, right? So I'm asking you, and I'm saying if you put in 100 hours, you'll be a person who can play the guitar. You'll be a beginner still, but you'll be a person who can play. If you put in 500 hours, you'll probably be a decent guitar player. Someone who's just able to do the thing, right? 100 hours is like binge watching 2 shows. Okay? People, they say, oh, I wanted to play guitar my whole life. It's like, did you watch all of CSI at some point? Did you read a big book? You could have been a guitar player. It's about hours put in. So I operate under 4 main tenets for training. I'm going to explain them now. Number 1, always approach music from a place of love, joy, self-care, and self-improvement. Okay? This is really important because music is an awful way to make a living. There's no reason to do it if you're not enjoying, aspects of it. Or you're saying self-improvement can be hard, but we understand that it's about improving ourselves, and so we put in the effort. But I didn't say from a place of entertainment, right? I said love, joy, self-care, self-improvement. There will be times when it's boring. There will be times when it's the last thing that you want to do, and there will be times when it's the best thing you'll ever experience, right? It's just, that's the way it goes. You've got good days, bad days, tired days, motivated days. And when you get into conservatory or something, it was common for people to practice until they puked. I'm not even joking. Like, it is strenuous. It is like med school level. We're talking everyone's working really, 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 really hard. I mean, conductors often die in their 30s from overwork. Like, it is hard. It is a hard world. Okay? So a half hour a day of light guitar fundamentals is a small ask in that world. Kind of off track, but point is, with the first tenet, we're just trying to, make sure it's coming from a healthy place. And that's the most important. These are in order of importance. So like for you, a healthy place might be like accepting, okay, well, I've only got 5 minutes today, so I'm going to pick up a guitar and I'm going to do some chord push-ups and I'm going to say, yay, I'm getting my practice streak met, and that's what I did, right? And if it feels like that's the only healthy thing you can do that day, that's fine. The next tenet is trying to get streaks of days. We're always trying to get as many days in a row as we can, because that's how habits are formed. And we need a practice compulsion, or we probably won't practice. The third is the amount of mental engagement that you're capable of. So mental engagement is, are you able to engage with it and feel like you're paying attention, or are you immediately distracted and thinking about, what am I going to have for dinner, and, I've got to wash my bed sheets and whatever, right? You want to actually be engaged in what you're doing. And then the fourth tenet is optimization of the activities. So if a student or any musician is practicing and ticking all 4 of those boxes, where it's coming from a place of self-improvement and self-care, they're getting streaks of days, they're highly mentally engaged, and they're doing highly optimized activities, then that person's going to be making a ton of progress regularly. If a person is needing to make cuts, well, cut from the bottom. So, okay, I guess I'm not going to worry about optimized activities right now. I guess I'm not going to worry about mental engagement. I'm just going to enjoy myself and try to get some streaks of days practicing my chords or doing whatever I feel like with the guitar. That's okay. If you can't do anything else, do that. But if you can do more, try to do things that you can engage with and try to do things that are optimized, right? Now, some things might not be that mentally engaging, in which case that's where having a bit of discipline, and discipline is sort of a misunderstood concept in our society because it has a sort of negative connotation. But the way I interpret discipline is people who have discipline are doing the things they say they're going to do. They do the things they commit to. They do the things that matter to them. That's what discipline is. Okay? It's not a negative. It's I'm going to say that this matters to me and I'm going to do it. If you have discipline, you will do what matters to you, and that's a skill that you want to develop and nurture. And that's a big part of it. Again, just like going to the gym. I will say this about going to the gym. It is hard to motivate myself to do it, but I've never regretted it after the fact. I always feel better afterwards. Same thing with practice. Sometimes motivating myself to practice is the hardest thing, but once there's a guitar in my hands and I'm doing something, I usually feel like doing a little bit more, and I usually come away from that feeling refreshed and a bit better about myself. Let's move on. All right, today we're going to talk about notes and pitches for the most part. We haven't really covered this yet. So the term pitch and note are often used interchangeably, but they are not entirely interchangeable. They actually mean different things. Pitch is more scientific, and it's referring to a steady vibration of air molecules measured in cycles per second, which we call hertz. Okay? So this is meant to represent pitches. Anytime we have this sort of oscillation of vibrating air molecules that are at a stable rate, it produces a tone or a pitch. However, there's an infinite number of possible pitches because the amount of hertz can contain decimal places. So we could continue to drill down and say, okay, we've got 440 cycles per second, but we also have 440.1 and 440.11 and 440.111 and so on. When a frequency change, a change in pitch is very small, our ears can't even hear the difference between them. Our cochleas are not infinitely sensitive, and so there is actually a limit to what we can hear, but there is no limit to how we could theoretically subdivide. And if we had measuring tools that could measure really, really precise frequencies, we would find that there was essentially an infinite number of them. And it's really hard to communicate hertz when you're talking with other musicians. So like when I play this note here, this is a C, and it's 261.6 hertz. But as a musician, it's easier for me to say I'm playing C than it is for me to say I'm playing 261.6 hertz. And if I'm talking to like another musician, I don't want to have to say, oh man, you played 268 hertz there, and I need you to play 261.6. Like that's just, humans don't really talk that way. Our brains don't really usually work that way. And so notes were invented. Notes are actually names for specific agreed upon pitches. So that's the difference. Like, notes are pitches, but not all pitches are notes. It's kind of like a square-rectangle relationship, right? Where squares are rectangles, but not all rectangles are squares, I think is how that works. I haven't been in geometry in a few years. But, so you can use the term pitch to refer to any note that's being played, but you can't use the term note to refer to any pitch that's being played. And when we're talking about notes, we're talking about specific named pitches, okay? So notes are names for agreed upon frequencies used in our tuning system. Modern music is derived based on concert pitch. So concert pitch is called A440. And if you use electronic tuner, you'll often see 440 hertz listed as sort of like the starting point for that. And this A is where like an entire orchestra would tune based upon to make sure that everyone was in tune together. So they'll find that A, and then all the other notes are derived from relationships from that one A. We talked about octaves last week. Octaves are frequencies that have double or half the frequency of each other. So the frequency of A3 is an octave below A4, and it is 220 hertz, whereas A4 is 440 hertz, and A5 is 880 hertz. The numbers next to the notes are called register numbers, and they tell us which octave the note is within. This idea of octave register numbers. The octave numbers always increase on the C. So in music, C is often thought of as the default starting pitch and not A. That can be a little bit confusing because the alphabet starts with A, obviously, but C can be thought of as sort of the start of the musical alphabet often. And if you go down to the bottom here, you'll see this Wikipedia piano key frequencies chart. This is a really cool chart. It shows a piano keyboard, and it lists off here the names of the notes with their octave registry numbers and what their frequencies are. So you can see the piano keyboard, and you can see the frequencies and the note names. So here A2 is 110 hertz. A3 is 220 hertz. A4 is 440 hertz. A5 is 880 hertz. A6 1760 hertz. And notice these numbers, the registry numbers, always increase at C. So here's B4, and then we have C5. Here's B3 and C4. So anytime we go to a C, the numbers increase by 1. When we pluck a string, that string is actually vibrating back and forth at a specific number of times per second, and that vibration back and forth creates the disturbed air molecules that produce the pitch. So when I play a low E on the guitar, this is actually 82.41 hertz, and we call it E2, which is the lowest note on a standard tuned guitar, 82.41 hertz. Lower pitches have a slower vibration than pitches that are higher. So higher pitches have a higher frequency. So if I play E4, that's 329.62 hertz, and it is higher in pitch and a faster vibration. So this low string here is vibrating slower than the high string is. And there's 3 properties that determine how quick a string vibrates. Its mass, its length, and its tension. On the guitar, all of our strings are the same length, and we try to aim for approximately similar tension between them. So the way that we get a range of pitches is by changing the mass of each string. So you'll notice some of the strings are thick and some of the strings are thin. And so the thicker the string, the more mass it has, the slower it will vibrate. And the less mass it has, the faster it will vibrate. As we go up the string, like this, we get faster in pitch because the string is getting shorter. So we could say, because the string is vibrating from the fret to the bridge, and the shorter it gets, the faster it vibrates. So we could say a longer string vibrates slower than a shorter string, which also makes sense because it's got more mass if it's longer, right? So that's a thing. And then how tight a string is, how much tension. So if we loosen the strings, they go all floppy and sound lower. And if we tighten them, they get higher in pitch. So we could say a tighter string vibrates faster than a looser string. And so getting all of those balanced and getting them correct is a bit of an art form. And when you get more serious about guitar, you may choose to have very balanced strings. And the vibrating air molecules are just disturbed by that string, and your ear picks them up, and it's like, okay, well, that's, when those properties are followed, we always get that result. So it's kind of cool. And you can actually figure out the guitar's tuning entirely based on those physics properties of how strings vibrate at different speeds. I think we're going to go a little over time today, unfortunately. Well, it's fine with me, but hopefully everyone will be able to stay around for a few minutes. Okay, now the circle of notes, this is a way of thinking about the musical letters, because in music, they actually circle around. And a lot of times, if you just write them out linearly, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, it's hard to think backwards and forwards. So I like to put the notes in a circle here. And you'll notice that there's these black spaces in the circle. These are actually corresponding to the black keys on a piano keyboard. So if we look at a piano keyboard, we have white keys and black keys. The white keys are what we call the natural notes, and the black keys are what we call the accidentals. And the accidentals have multiple names, and they're thought of as sort of being in between the natural notes. So if we're going from one direction or the other, we could refer to them as sharp or flat. So going around the circle here, we have A, B, C, D, E, F, G. And one thing to practice is in music, you're likely to move through the alphabet very non-linearly, and it's just as common to go backwards as forwards. So you want to practice going G, F, E, D, C, B, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, A, G, F, E, D, C, B, A, or even jumping around A, C, E, G, B, F, D, A. Just trying to get really comfortable with moving through it in lots of different ways. When a note is right next to another note, we call it a half step. When there's a space between them, we call it a whole step. So we could say that A and B are a whole step apart, but B and C are a half step apart. E and F are a half step apart, and D and E are a whole step apart. If we start on C, we have whole step, half step, whole step, whole step, whole step, half step. That is actually the formula for the C major scale. And the major scale is the foundation of Western music theory. Everything's based on the major scale. So you'll see whole step, half step, whole step, half step happening a lot. And we can start on, so the frets on the guitar are arranged in half steps. So if I start on any note, like this C, this first fret is a C, I can go C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, and that's going to follow whole step, half step, whole step, half step. I can do that anywhere on the guitar and play a major scale based on that note. If I start on this C, those scales sound similar to each other. But if I start on any note and follow that pattern, I can play the major scale from that note. So here I'm starting on F, and I can play an F major scale just by going whole step, half step, whole step, half step. And we'll talk about that more as we go. But the accidentals are going to be having multiple names, and when we go clockwise through the circle, we call it ascending, and when we go counterclockwise, we call it descending. The traditional way of naming these is that when you're ascending, you can use the sharp. So if I said A sharp, B, C, C sharp, D, D sharp, E, F, F sharp, G, G sharp, A. And that's going around in half steps for the whole thing. And if I was descending, I could go A flat, G, G flat, F, E, E flat, D, D flat, C, B, B flat, A. That rule is not always adhered to in music, but there are other contexts. When you learn music theory and keys, you will know when to use a sharp or a flat. For now, just know that the spaces in between the natural notes could be one or the other. So this note here could be called A sharp or B flat, depending on context. The other thing is, a lot of musicians don't know when to use the term A sharp or B flat. So they'll use one or the other, and it won't always be, necessarily theoretically accurate, but it's still actually quite, still communicates the note they're playing. So an A sharp and a B flat note sound exactly the same as each other. Okay. When two notes have different spellings, but they sound the same, that's called enharmonic equivalency. So if you want a really fancy academic term to impress your friends, say, today in class we studied enharmonic equivalency. They might be impressed, or they'll probably just stare at you. Moving on. All right. But this musical alphabet has been used for a long time, and it's probably not going away, and it does require a bit of practice. So I would just practice through the circle, going around and trying to know that anytime there's a B, there's going to be a C a half step above it. And anytime there's an E, there will be an F a half step apart. So B and C and E and F are always going to be a half step apart, and then all the other notes need their space. I like to say that Bonnie and Clyde are friends, and Ethel and Franklin Roosevelt are friends, and everyone else needs their space. Now, on the guitar, we can see that this is true. So if we have an E, there's always an F right next to it. And if we have a B, there's always a C right next to it. And I like this way of mapping out the fretboard. So this is a 24 fret fretboard. It's like a full electric guitar will have 24 frets. A lot of guitars will kind of cut off at 17, but we're showing the whole thing. And what I like to show here is if the note name and the register number are the same, that means that it's a duplicate pitch. So notice C3 exists here and here on the guitar. Those are the same note as each other. It's just in multiple places. The guitar actually has lots and lots of duplicate notes. In fact, all of the notes on strings 5, 4, 3, and 2, those are all actually redundant. You could cut those strings off and still have the same exact number of notes, because this E string has an E4 up here, and this E string starts on E4. So that means every note in between those is actually completely redundant. So 4 out of 6 strings are just there for giving you more options of how to play and making it so that we can play chords. And so if we look at C4 here, we can see that we have 5 of them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This is great because it gives us lots and lots of options for where we play. But it does make the guitar complex to master and really understand. Here's the range of the guitar on the piano keyboard. So remember, the register numbers always go up at C. So all of these yellow notes are what we call 2. So we have E2, F2, G2, A2, B2. And we can see that A2 and B2 repeat. And then we get into register 3, where we have C3, D3, E3, F3, G3, A3, B3. And then those repeat again on this string, C3, D3, E3, F3, G3, A3, B3. And then we have repeats starting on D3, G3, and then B3, and then we go to 4. So this is the range of the guitar on the piano keyboard. So if you had someone who played piano and you wanted to figure out, okay, where are they playing that? So say they played this D3 note here. You'd have 3 options for where you could play it on the guitar, and you would choose whichever option made the most sense to you. Okay, so when you're learning this, what I would recommend is just have this diagram pulled up and just start on the open note. And so E, F, G2, A2, B2, C3, D3, E3, F3, G3, A3, B3, C4, D4, and just go up until you run out of and then try going back down. D4, C4, B3, A3, G3, F3, E3, D3, C3, B2, A2, G2, F2, E2. So there I just went up and down the E string. Saying those notes out loud so you start to familiarize yourself with them, and then going to the next string and doing the same thing. I'm not saying them out loud right now, but you should be when you're doing it on your own. I just don't want to take a bunch of time. So going up and down all of the strings until you run out of frets, and just practicing saying those notes so you start to familiarize yourself with that range. I also included on here the musical staff. We'll talk about this more in later lessons, but here's where the notes on the musical staff fall on the guitar, and they're color-coded based on those octave registers. So you could theoretically use this to read sheet music and find where your notes are and then map out where to play them on the guitar. That is not really something beginners should be doing, but it is something that you theoretically could do if you felt like you wanted to. Here, I've included two diagrams. This is just with all of the flats listed, included for a 17-fret guitar. So if you wanted to practice going up and doing all the flats, E, F, G flat, G, A flat, A, B flat, B, C, D flat, D, you could go up. And when we include all of the notes like that, when we go up in half steps, we call that the chromatic scale. Chromatic means color, and it contains all of the notes in the scale. So we call it the chromatic scale. Oh, wait, I wasn't sharing my screen here. Sorry. So here's the diagram I'm talking about with the flats. E, F, G flat, G, A flat, A, B flat, B. And then I included a diagram with sharps as well, so you could practice going up E, F, F sharp, G, G sharp, A sharp, B, and so on. And these are just names. You don't have to worry about, why is this one called F? Why is this one called F sharp? Like, why is a banana called a banana? You know, there might be some reason, but just learn the names. They'll never change. It'll be fine. The last thing that I wanted to wrap up with is this open position natural note scale. This is a really, really good one to practice. Practicing your scales in general, we've already talked about how important that is. And this is a great way to learn positions. So on guitar, when we play in a position, our hand is staying in one place and we're playing one finger per fret. This is a very sort of conventional way of playing. See how I can integrate my chords with my melody. That is utilizing positional playing, because I know where the chords are, and I know where the scale is, and my melody and fills come from that scale, and my chords are the chords. There I just practiced 3 chords that we already knew, C, F, and G. So with this open position natural note scale, you can practice going E2, F2, G2, A2, B2, C3, D3, E3, F3, G3, A3, B3, C4, D4, E4, F4, G4. With the other diagrams in here, I would like you to practice going up and down each string and saying the notes, but the goal is not to memorize them all right now. The goal is to just practice doing it. But when it comes to this, when it comes to positional playing, we actually do want to really memorize them and try to become an expert in them. So as you're going up and down practicing those, make sure that you play and say them out loud. E2, F2, G2, A2, B2, C3, D3, E3, F3, G3, A3, B3, C4, D4, E4, F4, G4, and then practicing backwards, which we call descending. G4, F4, E4, D4, C4, B3, A3, G3, F3, E3, D3, C3, B2, A2, G2, F2, E2. And starting to familiarize yourself with those. Now notice, those notes are actually repeated on the guitar in, many places. So this, E2 to D4, we can find those notes on the single string. I could go E2, F2, G2, A2, B3, C3, D3, E3, F3, G3, A3, B3, C4, D4. So I could play most of that scale. Oops. Hopefully. I can play most of that scale on a single string. But notice, that means I have to change position the entire time. My hand's just moving up to these different positions, whereas if I don't want to do that, if I want to stay in one position, then I do that by crossing over strings and going to new strings. This allows us to play faster, so like when you see, someone shredding a scale or something, they're going to be trying to find notes that are in a close position to each other. And, sometimes people will move position for different reasons, but a lot of players will stay in one position the whole time because that means that the notes are close together. So you can think of a position on the guitar as like a little keyboard, like a mini keyboard. And on that, you can play, the notes that are in that range. And then if you want to go outside of the notes in that range, then you're going to have to change positions. But, tons and tons of songs are going to be staying in one position. In the style of Dust in the Wind by Kansas, as one would say. So you can see how my hand is just staying in this position, and everything I'm playing is coming out of that integration of the basic chords and that open position scale. So that's what I'm going to give you to practice this week, is keep going with your chord push-ups. Keep your warm-up exercises going. Chord push-ups, by the way, they're the best known method for learning new chords. And there are hundreds of possible chord shapes, so no matter how good at guitar you get, no matter how much experience you get, you're going to have to learn new chords. And that's where, you'll see me doing chord push-ups as well, right, for those. But I also want you to know that there's a finite amount of effort required to get good at your chords. Like I said, if you get about 1,000 chord push-ups per chord, you probably know that chord as well as you need to. If your hand can instantly snap to the shape, that means you have the muscle memory. And if you can instantly do that, there's no point in continuing to practice it. It's kind of like you probably don't sit around practicing 2 + 2 because you probably know that it's 4, right? Getting a tiny bit faster at that operation will not improve your quality of life, right? Well, it takes about 20. I would say most average guitar players probably have about 20 or so chord shapes they use all the time. And it takes about a half hour per chord. So that's about 10 hours total of chord practice before you could actually play, your as much chords as most players can play. And 10 hours is nothing. It's nothing, okay, in the grand scheme of things. So I want you to see that as something that's tangible and realistic to achieve. And just realize it's short term. I gave you 4 chords to work on, and I'm asking you to get about 2 hours total of practice with chord push-ups on them over a period of weeks or months, right? Once you've put in that time, you'll be great at them, and you'll be able to play lots and lots of songs with confidence, or at least get through the chords in them with confidence. So again, it takes a bit of patience, but this is old world skills that do take patience. And if we don't have patience and we don't put in the time, we don't make the time, we don't practice regularly, then guitar's not ever really going to be that fruitful. But if you are able to practice regularly and put in the basic fundamental time, you're guaranteed to become a guitar player. And we're talking 100 hours of practice. If you do a half hour a day, you can get there in, like 3 to 6 months very easily, right? And so think about it as any other skill. If you spend 100 hours learning to bake, you'll probably be able to bake a good cake. If you spend 100 hours learning to play guitar and you actually practice the method that I outline here, you should be able to play guitar. And then you'll be like every other guitar player, which is someone who plays who is looking to get better. So, all right, we'll wrap up there. And like I said, we will get into songs and stuff more, but for now, think about these as the stepping stones to the songs and try to have the patience, because in no universe am I trying to teach you guitar in a way that won't allow you to play songs, right? I'm actually trying to get you there as efficiently as possible. And the really efficient way is to take a few months to learn the fundamentals and realize that if you can stick through that, you're going to be fine. But if you try to skip a step, you're going to be lost, like almost every other beginner out there. It's just really important to establish those fundamentals. Okay, well, as always, it was nice seeing you, and let's wrap up there.